As I listened to that speech, I was reminded of a comment that Winston Churchill once made about Aneurin Bevan in the House of Commons, and he said to him, "The member should not develop more indignation than he can contain." What we saw from the Leader of the Opposition was an extraordinary huff and puff about this bill. The only problem with his comments are that they are at direct variance with everything his colleagues have been saying in this chamber for the last hour and a half. If you just come into the debate or switched on your television, on your radio, you would assume, Mr Chairman, from the Leader of the Opposition's comments, that the Labor Party is voting against this bill. But every single one of their speakers to date has been at pains to point out their support for the legislation. So, Mr Speaker, the attitude of the Leader of the Opposition seems totally at variance with his colleagues. But there were some great gems during his remarks. He objected to forthcoming property taxes that the government is allegedly about to levy. Well, Mr Chairman, what we're doing is removing the capacity for people to depreciate property under certain circumstances, but we are not doing what every Labor speaker has failed to deny this morning is in their intent, and that is bring in a capital gains tax and a land tax to punish investors. So you have the Leader of the Opposition saying on the one hand that there's some dastardly plan afoot on the government side to bring in a property tax, while his colleagues are up here this morning, one after the other, criticising the government for having ruled out a land tax and a capital gains tax. He's simply out of touch, sir, with the reality of his own side, let alone the attitude of the rest of New Zealanders. He then complained about the fact that the GST is allegedly the fourth highest consumption tax in the world. But we saw nothing in his speech, and there's been no amendment moved by his party to date to give effect to one of his other great policies, taking GST off fresh fruit and vegetables, which he's been touting of late. If this is the fourth highest consumption tax in the world, and if people are suffering to the extent that he claims they are suffering, then I would have thought he would have moved his pet amendment today so that this House would have had a chance to consider it. But absolutely not. In fact, the professions of support from his colleagues for this legislation continue unabated. So, Mr Chairman, the Leader of the Opposition cannot have it two ways. He cannot come down here and make a strong and vigorous speech opposing the legislation while his colleagues in the opposition benches continue to get up one after the other and profess their support for it and profess their support for the government's amendments as being user-friendly and just what's needed to make the measure work more effectively. Mr Chairman, one can only draw some internal conclusions about the state of the Leader of the Opposition's party from those remarks. What one can also say is that they make no contribution whatsoever to the quality of this debate. They make no contribution to the issues that are actually being put before the House today. Mr Chairman, these measures, which have been worked through in the GST advisory panel, which are actually in response to submissions received from the general public, are positive, are beneficial, and it's no wonder they're supported by the party opposite. It's just a great pity that none of the colleagues over there have sought to inform their leader of the position that their party's taking. And as a consequence, he comes in here, stands exposed, wrong speech, wrong occasion, and the reality is his colleagues will continue to support this bill. His colleagues will continue, as they've all said during the number of calls they've had to date, to profess their support for its provisions. Maybe someone should tell the Leader of the Opposition where his party stands.
Honourable David Cunliffe.
Which chamber the Honourable Minister was sitting in during the excellent speech by the Leader of the Opposition, because it clearly wasn't this one. The Leader of the Opposition said, as members on this side have consistently said, that although Labor will be supporting this bill because hard-working New Zealanders need some relief from the tremendous shambles of the introduction of this tax, that we will be passing an SOP that will give ratepayers relief and which will ease the burden on ordinary New Zealanders from the oppressive increase to this tax. And Mr Speaker, New Zealanders up and down the country know that National is so out of touch. It is saying, like Aaron Gilmore said in the previous speech but one, that the amounts are so small, why would the peasants and the serfs notice? It's because they can't put food on their table, Mr. Gilmore. It is because our constituents are crowded into houses, 2 and 3 families into a house, that $20 a week